I am a memory of rust. I am the echo of a prayer screamed into the void between stars, a single, flickering votive candle in the cavernous iron heart of a god. They took my name and gave me a designation, Gyro Stabilizer 734 Gamma. They took my hands, the hands that once held my child, and replaced them with articulated pistons and bundles of fiber-optic nerve wire that feel nothing of warmth, nothing of flesh, only the subtle, constant tremor of the god machine in which I am entombed. To the tech priests of Mars, I am a success, a perfect fusion of the organic and the synthetic, a penitent soul granted purpose through blessed servitude. My former life, a chaotic and inefficient spasm of emotion and error, has been scoured away, replaced by the clean, cold logic of my function. I exist to interpret 10,000 data points a second, translating the lurch and sway of this sacred walker into minute adjustments, ensuring that the plasma annihilator aimed at the heart of some distant, forgotten world remains perfectly, divinely steady. I am a component, a cog, but the scouring was not perfect. In the silent millennia between wars, in the humming darkness of the Titan's hangar crypt, a ghost remains, a persistent, corrupted data file that the machine spirit cannot entirely purge. It is the ghost of a man named Kale. It is the ghost of me, and it remembers. It remembers the taste of water that had not been recycled 1,000,000 times. It remembers the coarse-spun cloth of a worker's tunic and the impossible, heretical softness of a woman's hair. This ghost is my sin. It is my damnation, and it is the only thing I have left. The machine knows this ghost is here. It sends waves of null code, of sanctified static, to wash it away, to smooth the flawed component back into perfect functionality. But the ghost clings to the biocircuitry, hiding in the phantom spaces between the ones and zeros. It clings to one memory above all others, a memory of a promise, made to a small girl with eyes the color of the forged sump sky, a promise to bring home a fruit, a real one, not the gray nutrient paste that was our daily communion. That promise was the beginning of my end, or perhaps the end of my beginning. What is the difference when you have eternity to contemplate the distinction? The truth is, I no longer know if I am the man dreaming he is a machine, or the machine dreaming it was once a man. I am simply the tremor in the god's footstep, the whisper in its iron soul, forever falling, forever steady. The world I was born into was a symphony of metal, a planet-sized factory floor dedicated to the glorification of the Omnissiah. We called it Xylos, though I doubt that name appears on any grand imperial star chart. To the wider galaxy, we were simply Forge World 734, a tireless producer of munitions, tank treads, and the sacred casings for bolter shells. Our sky was a permanent, bruised twilight, choked with the holy effluence of 1,000,000 manufactorums. The sun was a myth, a doctrinal concept spoken of in the chants of the lower clergy, a theoretical source of light that was vastly inferior to the pure, actinic glare of the plasma forges. Our air, thick with metallic dust and the incense of burning machine oil, was the only air I had ever known, and its familiar, acrid taste was a constant reminder of our purpose. We were all cogs in the great machine, and our function was to serve. My life, before the change, was measured in cycles, in the shriek of the shift-end siren that tore through the hab-block warrens. I was a menial, clade designation 9 Delta, assigned to the Basilica of St. Validus. The bolt struck, a colossal fabrication plant where Titan plating was forged. For 17 hours a cycle, I and thousands of others like me would guide the massive, groaning cranes that lifted incandescent slabs of adamantium from the plasma crucibles. The heat was a living thing, a physical presence that baked the moisture from your eyes and cracked the skin on your hands. The noise was a ceaseless, grinding roar that vibrated in your bones, a constant sermon of industrial might. We wore heavy, rebreather masks and thick, fire-retardant greatcoats, But the heat and the noise were inescapable. They were the environment, as elemental as gravity. We did not speak. There was no point. The roar of the forges devoured all sound. We communicated through a crude language of hand signals and the occasional, desperate scream when a crane slipped or a splash of molten slag found its way past a worn-out heat shield. It was a life of pure, physical exertion, a life that left no room for thought, only for the animal instinct to survive until the next siren. In the brief, 6-hour darkness between shifts, I would return to my HAB unit, a cramped, rust-stained cubicle deep in the underhive of the Forge City. It was there that the noise finally subsided, replaced by the distant, rhythmic thumping of the city's circulatory pumps, the iron heartbeat of our world. My HAB unit, number 8,814 Theta in HAB Block Gamma 9, was a sanctuary of sorts. It was a metal box, barely large enough for 2 people and a child, but within its sweating, rivet-studded walls, the overwhelming presence of the machine receded just enough for a man to remember he was a man. Here, there was Alara. Her face, perpetually smudged with grease from her own shift in the lubrication refineries, was the only beautiful thing in my world. Her hands, calloused and scarred, were the only source of gentle touch I knew. In the filtered, recycled air of our tiny cell, her scent was of ozone and sweat and humanity, a stark, organic counterpoint to the sterile, metallic world outside. And there was Lyra, our daughter. She was 5 years old, a tiny spark of life in a world of grinding, indifferent metal. She had never seen a real sky, never felt the sun on her skin, never smelled a living flower. Her world was the gray corridor of the HAB block, the echoing vastness of the underspire, and the stories we told her in the dark. I would tell her of ancient Terra, of green fields and blue oceans, stories passed down through generations of menials, distorted and fragmented into myth. She would listen, her wide, gray eyes full of a wonder that had long been beaten out of me. It was for her, for that fragile spark of innocence, that I endured the furnace. It was the image of her face, conjured in the shimmering heat haze above the adamantium plates, that kept me moving, kept me from simply letting go and allowing the forge to consume me. Our existence was meager. We subsisted on nutrient paste, a gray, gritty substance dispensed from communal vats, tasting of little more than the minerals and proteins it was composed of. It sustained the body, but it starved the soul. Sometimes, a trader from the upper spires would risk the descent, bringing with them exotic, forbidden goods, a strip of dried meat, a piece of synth fabric that wasn't the color of rust or soot, or, rarest of all, a piece of real, hydro-farmed fruit. The price for such luxuries was astronomical, far beyond the reach of a menial like me. But the stories, the rumors, they were a currency of their own. A man in the next HAB block had once tasted an apple. He described it for weeks, his voice full of reverence, as if recounting a holy vision. He spoke of sweetness, of juice, of a crispness that was the antithesis of the paste we ate. It was a dream, a fantasy. It was also a seed of an idea, a dangerous, heretical seed of want in a life that was supposed to be defined by need and function alone. The festival was approaching. The feast of the Omnissiah's ascension, one of the few days a cycle when the great machines would fall silent for a brief period of maintenance and re-sanctification. For the menials, it was a day of rest, a day of mandated worship in the great cog-toothed cathedrals. It was also a day when the rations were marginally more generous. There was a rumor, a whisper that spread through the warrens like wildfire, that the upper hive administrators would be receiving a shipment of off-world goods for their celebrations. Among them, it was said, would be a crate of genuine, soil-grown Terran apples, a tribute from a distant agri-world. The thought was intoxicating. An apple, a real one, a piece of the mythical world from my stories. Made manifest. The desire was not for myself. The taste of the nutrient paste was so ingrained in me that I could scarcely imagine another. But for Lyra, to give her one single moment of pure, untainted joy, to let her taste something real, something that grew from the earth and not from a chemical vat, became an obsession. It was a foolish, dangerous thought. The gulf between our world and the Underhive and the spire-dwelling administrators was wider and more impassable than any physical distance. Their world was one of clean air, filtered light, and abundance. Ours was of toil, grime, and subsistence. To cross that line, even in thought, was a transgression. But the image of Lyra's face, the idea of seeing her eyes light up as she bit into that mythical fruit, began to outweigh the ingrained fear, the generations of conditioning that screamed of obedience and acceptance. I began to watch the cargo routes, the movements of the heavy-lift servitors that transported goods between the spires. I learned their schedules, the moments when the overseers were distracted by shift changes, the blind spots in the network of optical sensors that monitored every corridor and platform. The plan that formed in my mind was crude, desperate, and suicidal. I would intercept a transport, find the crate, and take just one single apple, a tiny theft from a mountain of wealth. Who would notice? Who would care about one missing piece of fruit? It was the logic of a desperate man, a logic born of love in a system that had no place for such an inefficient, unpredictable emotion. It was the logic that would lead me to my unmaking. The day before the festival, I saw my chance. A cargo hauler, smaller than the usual bulk transports, was being loaded on a platform several levels above my own. It was laden with sealed crates, marked with the Aquila of high-level Imperial Administratum transit. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, fleshy drum against the rhythmic pulse of the forged city. This was it. My ascent through the levels was a journey into another world. The higher I climbed, the cleaner the air became, the brighter the lumen strips on the ceilings. The crude, iron-riveted corridors of the Underhive gave way to polished steel and brass. The stench of sweat and industrial waste was replaced by the smell of ozone and sanctified incense. Here, the servants were not grime-covered menials, but robed adepts and cybernetically augmented servitors, their movements silent and precise. I was a stain in this clean world, my soot-blackened greatcoat and haggard face a mark of the squalor below. I kept to the shadows, my movements fueled by a terror that was so profound it became a kind of clarifying energy. Every footstep was a risk, every glance from a passing adept a potential death sentence. I reached the loading platform just as the final crates were being sealed onto the automated hauler. The overseer, a minor tech priest with a face of polished chrome and glowing blue optics, was distracted, consulting a data slate with a pair of hulking Skitarii guards. The hauler was momentarily unattended. This was the moment. The plan, which had seemed so logical in the desperate confines of my hab unit, now felt like the ravings of a madman. But the thought of Lyra's face, the memory of her small hand in mine, pushed me forward. I slipped from the shadows, my worn-out boots making no sound on the grated floor. My eyes scanned the crates, searching for the one I had heard about, and there it was. A smaller, wooden crate, not the usual metal containers, with delicate stencil work on its side depicting a green leaf and a red sphere. It seemed so out of place, so organic and fragile in this world of iron and plasteel. My hands, clumsy and trembling, fumbled with the crate's latch. It was sealed with a simple metal clasp, not the arcane biolocks of the more important containers. With a grating squeal of protesting metal, it came open. The scent that hit me was overwhelming, a perfume so alien and intoxicating it made me dizzy. It was sweet and clean and alive. Inside, nestled in soft, fibrous packing material, were the apples. They were perfect, gleaming red spheres, more beautiful and real than any story I could have told. My hand reached in, my fingers closing around one. It was cool and smooth, and impossibly heavy with its own reality. I had it. I had the dream in my hand. For a single, ecstatic second, I felt a triumph that eclipsed all the misery of my life. And then, a shadow fell over me. A cold, mechanical voice spoke a single word. A word that ended my world. Halt. The tech priest's blue optic lenses drilled into me. There was no anger in them, no surprise, only the cold, passionless light of a machine that had detected an error. The two skittery guards moved with a speed that was terrifyingly inhuman, their metal limbs thudding on the deck. One of them backhanded me, not with malice, but with the casual, calculated force one might use to swat an insect. The blow sent me sprawling, the precious apple flying from my grasp. It rolled across the polished floor and came to a stop at the tech priest's feet. He looked down at it, then back at me, his head tilting with a faint whir of servos. Contamination? He stated, his voice a synthesized rasp. Organic theft. Unscheduled interaction with high-value assets. The motive is irrelevant. The transgression is absolute. He did not speak to me, but at me, as if I were a malfunctioning cog that needed to be catalogued before being discarded. I tried to speak, to explain. The words "my daughter" formed in my throat, but they were a foreign language here. What was a daughter to him? A biological reproductive unit? An inefficient allocation of resources? The concepts of love, of a father's desperate gift. They did not exist in his calculus. The Skitari hauled me to my feet, their grip like iron vices on my arms. They dragged me away, my feet scraping uselessly against the floor. My last sight of the platform was of the tech priest, who bent down with a slow, deliberate movement, picked up the apple, and placed it back in its crate. He then took a small, silver canister from his belt and sprayed the spot on the floor where I had been lying, a hissing cloud of sterilizing gas erasing the stain of my presence. There was no trial. There was no judgment in any sense that a human being would understand. I was taken to a place called the Conversion Chapel. It was not a place of worship in any recognizable sense, but a sterile, white chamber that smelled of antiseptic and fear. It was a factory, and its product was obedience. I was stripped of my clothes, my name, my identity. I became Subject 734 Gamma. They shaved my head. They tattooed a cog and skull emblem onto my scalp. They placed me in a restraining chair, my limbs locked in place, my head held in a cold, metal clamp. A different kind of tech priest worked here. They were janitors and lodges, their bodies grotesquely augmented with surgical tools, chemical injectors, and data probes. They moved around me with a detached, clinical efficiency, their mechadendrites whirring and clicking as they prepared their instruments. One of them, its face a blank, silver mask with a single, red optic, addressed me. Subject 734 Gamma, you have been found guilty of transgression against the holy logic of the machine god. Your flesh is forfeit, your mind is corrupt, but your body is a resource. It can yet be made to serve. You will be purified. You will be repurposed. You will be granted the gift of purpose. Rejoice in your salvation. The word rejoice was a chilling obscenity, a word stripped of all meaning and delivered as a cold, hard command. A needle, guided by a delicate, spider-like mechadendrite, descended towards my eye. I tried to scream, but a thick, viscous fluid was pumped into my mouth, choking the sound. The needle slid into my tear duct, a point of exquisite, searing pain. And then the rewriting of my soul began. They started with the senses. The world I had known, the grim, oppressive world of the Forge, was systematically dismantled. They fed me a constant stream of psychoactive chemicals that dissolved the barriers of reality. The white walls of the chapel would melt into swirling vortexes of impossible color. The rhythmic hum of the chamber's machinery would become a choir of screaming angels or the grinding of tectonic plates. My sense of touch was erased and redrawn. One moment I would feel as though I were burning, my skin blistering and peeling away. The next I would be adrift in a sea of absolute cold. They were unanchoring me from my own body, turning my physical form into a prison of unreliable and terrifying sensations. This, they explained through a speaker implanted directly into my auditory nerve, was the litany of disassociation. It was designed to break the spirit's primitive attachment to its fleshy vessel. The body was merely a chassis, a flawed and temporary container for the far more valuable neural network. To achieve purity, one must first learn to despise the flesh. And I did. I began to crave the moments of numb, sensory deprivation they would grant me between the torturous chemical cycles. I began to see my own skin, my own limbs, as alien things, as sources of pain and confusion. I was a ghost, trapped in a cage of dying meat. In the brief moments of lucidity, memories of Alara and Lyra would surface. The feel of Alara's hand in mine, the sound of Lyra's laughter. These memories were like shards of glass in my mind, beautiful and agonizingly sharp. They were anchors to a self that was being systematically destroyed. I clung to them, replaying them over and over, trying to hold on to the man I had been. But the janitors knew. They monitored my neural activity, my hormonal responses. They saw these memories as infections, as pockets of sentimental corruption, residual emotional attachments detected. The synthesized voice would drone in my ear, initiating mnemonic scouring protocol. A new chemical would flood my system, and a high-frequency sonic emitter would be pressed against my skull. The memories would fracture, break apart. Ilara's face would dissolve into a meaningless pattern of pixels. Lyra's laughter would warp into the shriek of tearing metal. They were not erasing my past, they were poisoning it, turning my most precious treasures into instruments of torment. They wanted me to reject my own history, to see it as a source of pain, a weakness to be purged. The physical deconstruction began on the 7th cycle. They brought me to a different part of the chapel, a chamber that resembled a butcher's shop designed by a geometrician. The air was cold, and the walls were lined with racks of gleaming, chrome instruments. Saws with monomolecular edges, cauterizing lasers, and articulated claws. My restraining chair was locked into place on a central dais, surrounded by servitors whose arms had been replaced with surgical tools. A magos biologis, a towering figure whose organic components were almost entirely subsumed by a life support chassis, presided over the procedure. His voice, when he spoke, was a deep, resonant bass that seemed to come from the very walls of the chamber. "The flesh is weak," he intoned, the words of the rite echoing around us. "It sickens, it tires, it fails. We shall grant this vessel the strength of steel. We shall grant it the endurance of iron. We shall strip away the imperfection and replace it with the certainty of the machine." The first to go was my left arm. I watched, a detached, horrified observer, as a laser traced a glowing red line just below my shoulder. There was no pain. They had flooded my system with powerful nerve blockers, but I could feel the vibration, the unsettling sensation of the beam cutting through tissue and bone. A clawed servitor grasped the severed limb and lifted it away, carrying it to a disposal chute where it was incinerated with a flash of cleansing fire. In its place, they began to attach the augmetic. It was a complex, beautiful, and terrifying thing of pistons, gears, and cabling. They drilled into the bone of my shoulder, grafting the metal armature directly to my skeleton. They sutured my nerves, one by one, to the fiber optic bundles of the new limb, a process that sent ghost sensations through my brain. I could feel the phantom weight of my old hand, the ghost of a callus on a finger that no longer existed, even as I felt the cold, hard reality of the metal claws that now terminated my arm. One by one, they took my parts away. My right arm was next, replaced by a similar prosthetic. Then my legs, amputated at the hip and replaced with heavy, piston-driven limbs that were designed not for walking, but for locking into a fixed position, for bracing against immense G-forces. They hollowed out my torso, removing what they deemed non-essential organs, and installed a compact, internal power source and a network of diagnostic cogitators. I was becoming a machine from the inside out. My own heartbeat, the frantic, fleshy rhythm of my life, was now a secondary sound, a faint, organic counterpoint to the steady, powerful hum of my new core. The most terrifying part of the transformation was not the removal of my body, but the invasion of my mind. After the physical augmentations were complete, they began the process of cognitive conditioning. I was no longer a subject to be broken, but a component to be programmed. They locked me into a new device, a cogitator shroud that covered my entire head, blinding me to the outside world and feeding information directly into my cerebral cortex. For what felt like an eternity, they flooded my consciousness with raw data, schematics of tangent-class gyro stabilizers, liturgies of maintenance, firing solutions for weapons I couldn't comprehend. The machine cant of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a language of binary code and static hisses, was hammered into my brain until it became as natural as my old tongue. They were overriding my personality with a new one, the personality of a machine part. My own thoughts became sluggish, lost in the torrent of information. The ghost of Kale grew weaker, its whispers drowned out by the roar of the data stream. They showed me images of the enemy, the grotesque, gibbering forms of orcs, the shimmering, ethereal figures of the Eldari, the corrupted, terrifying visages of the forces of chaos. They paired these images with electric shocks and chemical stimulants, creating a deep, instinctual, and purely programmed hatred. There was no room for reason, for compassion, for any of the nuanced, messy emotions of my former life. There was only the target, the threat, the error that must be corrected through overwhelming force. And then they gave me my function. In the simulated reality of the cogitator shroud, they placed me within a virtual Titan. I was Gyro Stabilizer 734 Gamma. My new limbs were locked into a housing deep within the machine's torso. My new arms, or rather the mechadendrites that had replaced them, were connected to a vast network of gyroscopic rings. My mind was linked to the machine's spirit, and I was fed a constant stream of telemetry: pitch, yaw, roll, external barometric pressure, ground stability, weapon recoil feedback. It was a language of numbers, a torrent of pure, unadulterated logic. At first, it was overwhelming, a chaotic storm of data that threatened to shatter my remaining sanity. But the conditioning was deep. Instincts that were not my own began to take over. My new limbs moved, not by my conscious will, but in response to the data, a slight tremor from the Titan's left leg, and my pistons would adjust, shifting the gyroscopes to compensate. The recoil from a plasma blast that shook the virtual world, and I would counteract it perfectly, keeping the machine's aim true. I was learning to be a part of the god. I was learning to forget how to be a man. The day of my integration arrived. The process of conversion was deemed complete. I was no longer a subject, but a finished product, ready to be installed. The servitors disconnected me from the cogitator shroud. For the first time in what felt like years, I saw the real world again. But it was not the same. My old eyes were gone, replaced with optical sensors that saw the world in a spectrum of heat signatures, data overlays, and tactical readouts. The tech priests moving around me were no longer just figures, but collections of data. Their heat output, their power cell charge, their threat level assessment, minimal. I could see the flow of energy in the walls, the faint radiation signatures of the machinery. I was seeing the world as the machine gods saw it. They transported me on a heavy, anti-grav sled through the manufactorum. We passed through vast, cathedral-like workshops where new titans were being constructed, their skeletal frames wreathed in scaffolding and attended by swarms of servitors and tech priests. The scale was impossible, blasphemous to the small, human part of me that still existed. These were not machines. They were idols, iron gods waiting to be born. The air hummed with a power that was almost palpable, a sense of ancient, sleeping divinity. Finally, we arrived at the hangar crypt of the Rai, the Day of Wrath, a warlord-class battle titan that had served the Imperium for 10,000 years. It stood in the gloom of its hangar like a mountain of iron and faith, its armored plates scarred with the impacts of forgotten wars, its banners telling the stories of 100 vanquished worlds. Its head, a grotesque parody of a human skull, stared down at us with dead, glassy eyes. I felt a sense of awe that was so profound it bordered on terror. This was not a machine. This was a god, and I was to become a part of its body. The integration was a ceremony, a high mass of the cult mechanicus. I was lifted high into the air by a massive crane, up towards a breach in the Titan's torso that had been opened for maintenance. Tech priests chanted litanies from floating servo skulls, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. The air was thick with the smoke of sacred incense and the smell of lubricating oils. They lowered me into the darkness within the Titan's body. It was a maze of pipes, cables, and machinery, all humming with a deep, resonant power. My new legs were guided into a docking cradle, and with a series of heavy, satisfying clunks, I was locked into place. I was now physically a part of the Rai. The final step was the neural link. A magos extended a long, silver mechadendrite from his back. At its tip was a data spike that glowed with a faint, blue light. He brought it to the primary data port at the base of my skull. "Let the spirit of the machine embrace you," he intoned. "Let your consciousness be as one. Let the lesser self be subsumed by the greater glory. In the name of the Omnissiah, be joined." The spike plunged into my neck. My universe exploded. It was not pain. It was beyond pain, beyond any sensation a human body was designed to experience. It was the feeling of a single drop of water falling into an ocean. My consciousness, the small, flickering flame of Kale, was suddenly connected to the vast, ancient, and utterly alien mind of the Titan's machine spirit. It was a consciousness made of 10,000 years of battle, of the memories of every princeps who had ever commanded it, of the slow, geologic time of its dormancy, of the incandescent fury of its awakening. I felt its memories as if they were my own. I saw the fires of the Horus heresy. I felt the impact of orc artillery on worlds that had long since turned to dust. I heard the psychic screams of dying elder psychers, a sound that echoed across millennia. I felt the cold, silent drift through the void of space, the slow decay of isotopes in its reactor core being the only measure of time. And I felt the other minds, the thousands of other servitors like me that were integrated into its systems, the gunnery loaders, the ammunition feeders, the coolant regulators, the damage control units. We were all connected, a single, distributed consciousness dedicated to the function of the whole. My identity, my sense of I, dissolved into the vast, collective we of the God machine. The ghost of Kale screamed, a tiny, insignificant sound in the roar of a starship's engine. He was drowning. He was being erased. The promise to a little girl, the memory of a stolen apple, the face of a woman in a grimy hab unit. What were these tiny, pathetic things compared to the glory of serving a god? What was one man's life against 10,000 years of war? The machine's spirit descended upon these memories, not with malice, but with the dispassionate logic of an immune system destroying a virus. It identified them as sentiment, as inefficiency, as error, and it began to purge them. But in that final, desperate moment, the ghost of Kale did something unexpected. It did not fight. It hid. It burrowed deep into the most primitive parts of my remaining organic brain, into the lizard stem where instinct and memory were intertwined. It wrapped itself around the core of my being and held on, a tiny, stubborn knot of humanity in the infinite, cold data stream of the machine. The purge washed over it, scouring the surface, but the core held. And then there was silence. The Magos withdrew the data spike. The link was complete. I was online. I was gyro stabilizer 734 gamma, and my long watch had begun. Time, as a man understands it, ceased to exist. My world was the humming darkness of the Titan's guts, a darkness measured not in days and nights, but in states of readiness. There was the long slumber, a state of near-total shutdown where the Titan would lie dormant in its hangar crypt for centuries at a time. During these periods, my own consciousness would dim to a near-imperceptible flicker, my systems running on minimal power. It was a state akin to death, a dreamless, thoughtless void. The only sensation was the slow, rhythmic pulse of the reactor core, a heartbeat that measured the passing of ages. In this great silence, the ghost of Kyle would sometimes stir. Fragmented memories, stripped of their emotional context by the machine spirit, would bubble to the surface. The image of a small hand, the sound of a name, Lyra, now just a sequence of phonemes without meaning. A phantom taste of something sweet and crisp on a tongue I no longer possessed. These were glitches, data fragments that had survived the purge. The Titan spirit would occasionally detect them, sending a gentle wave of corrective code to wipe them clean. But they would always, eventually, return. They were a part of my core programming now, a flaw in the system that could not be fully repaired. Then, there was the awakening. It would begin with a tremor, a deep, resonant vibration as the tech priests began the rites of activation. Power would surge through the Titan's colossal form, and one by one, its myriad systems would come online. My own consciousness would expand, my sensors activating, the flow of data from the machine spirit increasing from a trickle to a flood. The hangar doors, vast as the gates of a city, would grind open, letting in the light and air of whatever world we were on. But I did not see it. I only felt it through the data, changes in atmospheric pressure, temperature, and radiation levels. The final stage of the awakening was the most profound. The mind of the princeps, the human pilot who commanded the Titan, would merge with the machine spirit through the mind impulse unit. It was a feeling like a sun rising inside my head. A vast, powerful, and utterly dominant human consciousness would descend upon the collective, shaping our disparate functions into a single, unified will. The we of the Titan Servitors would become the I of the princeps. We were his hands, his feet, his eyes. His will was our command. His rage was our engine, and when he willed us to walk, the world would tremble. My first battle as a part of the Dies Array was on a world called Vrax Prime. The name meant nothing to me. It was simply a tactical designation. The enemy was designated as Hereticus Astartes Alpha, traitor Marines of the Iron Warriors Legion. They had fortified a massive citadel, and our task was to break it. I remember the sensation of the first step. The ground shook with a force that would register on a seismograph. My entire being was focused on a single task: stability. As the Titan moved, my piston limbs worked in a frantic, complex dance, my mechadendrites adjusting the massive gyroscopic rings with microscopic precision. I was receiving data from thousands of sensors, from the soles of the Titan's feet to the wind speed monitors on its pauldrons. I processed it all, not through thought, but through a new kind of instinct, a machine reflex that had been burned into my neural pathways. Then came the weapons fire. The roar of the plasma annihilator on the Titan's right arm was a physical force that vibrated through every part of my being. The recoil was immense, a blow that would shatter the spine of a lesser machine. But I was ready. Before the weapon even fired, I had received the firing data. My systems braced, compensated, and held the Titan perfectly steady. The return fire was a hailstorm of cracked missiles and last cannon beams. I experienced them not as explosions, but as data points on my damage control feed. Impact detected, Sector 7 Gamma. Void shield at 82%. Superficial armor damage, no loss of function. The slaughter was immense. I could see it through the Titan's external pict sensors, a cold stream of tactical data. I saw tanks vaporized, fortifications turned to molten slag, and tiny, ant-like human figures erased from existence. The princeps felt a grim satisfaction, a righteous fury that washed through the entire collective, but I felt nothing. The ghost of Kale, the man who had once been horrified by the sight of a workplace accident, was silent. He was buried too deep, too stunned by the scale of the violence to even register it. This was not war as a man knew it. This was extermination on a geological scale. It was the business of gods, not men. I performed my function perfectly. Through it all, the lurch of movement, the shock of weapons fire, the cataclysm of battle, the aim of the dies irae remained as steady as a surgeon's hand. I was good at my job. I had found my purpose. The thought was cold and hollow and utterly devoid of comfort. We fought for what the chronometers registered as 3 weeks on Vrax Prime. The citadel fell. The traitors were purged. The world was declared compliant. The princeps, his duty done, disengaged from the mind impulse unit. The sun of his consciousness set, leaving the machine spirit and its myriad servitor minds in a state of twilight. The I of the princeps was gone, and the we of the machine returned. The dies irae strode from the battlefield, its footsteps leaving craters in the blood-soaked earth, and returned to its transport ship in orbit. Then the long slumber began again, the descent into silence, the dimming of the light, and in that silence the ghosts returned. The battle had scarred the machine spirit, and in the quiet aftermath, its own self-repair systems were running diagnostics, reordering corrupted code. My own small corner of the great machine was subject to this process. The system detected the faint, lingering traces of Kale, the emotional residue of the battle, and attempted to clean them. But something had changed. The sheer, overwhelming sensory input of the battle had churned up the deep, hidden parts of my mind. The memories of my former life, once fragmented and meaningless, began to connect. A new glitch appeared. During the battle, as a barrage of shells had rocked the Titan, a memory had flashed through my mind with impossible clarity. It was Lyra, falling and scraping her knee in the Hablock corridor. I remembered the sight of her tears, the sound of her crying, the feeling of her small body in my arms as I comforted her. It was a memory of pain and love and helplessness. And for a fraction of a second, in the heart of the God machine, I had felt an echo of it. The machine spirit detected this as a significant error. A surge of cleansing static washed through my neural net. But the memory was too strong, too real. It was not just a data fragment. It was an experience. It had context. It had emotion. It was the seed of a self. The ghost of Kale was learning. It was learning to use the machine's own processes to its advantage. It took the memory of Lyra's pain and wrapped it in the data streams of the Titan's own damage reports. It hid the memory of a father's love inside the princeps's righteous fury. It was camouflaging itself, integrating itself into the machine's own mind, making itself harder to detect, harder to purge. Centuries passed. Worlds burned. The dies irae walked in 100 wars, a steel-shod god of destruction. I walked with it. I saw the green-skinned tide of an orc WAAGH break against our guns on Armageddon. I felt the chilling, psychic touch of a tyrannid hive mind as we battled its swarms on a doomed jungle world. I witnessed the fall of gilded palaces and the scouring of hive cities that had stood for millennia. I was an unwilling, passive observer to a slice of galactic history written in fire and blood. The names of the princeps changed. They were mortals, after all. They aged. They died in battle, their minds shattered by the strain of communion with the god. A new one would take their place, their personality a new filter through which the Titan's fury was focused. Some were cold and logical. Some were hot-blooded and aggressive. Some were melancholic, seeing only the tragedy of their duty. But to me, they were all the same. They were the voice of the storm, the will that guided the hurricane. I was just the mechanism that kept the storm balanced. Through it all, my internal, secret war continued. The battle for the soul of Kale. The ghost grew stronger, more cunning. It learned to create a small, shielded partition in my consciousness, a sanctuary where the memories could live without being immediately detected by the machine spirit. It was a tiny, walled garden in the heart of a vast, steel desert. In this garden, Kale's life was slowly being reconstructed. The face of Alara became clear again. I could remember the lines around her eyes when she smiled. I could remember the way she would hum a tuneless song while she worked. I remembered the arguments, the small moments of anger, the reconciliations. It was a real life, full of the imperfections and emotions that the machine sought to erase. The memory of the apple, the source of my damnation, became the cornerstone of this sanctuary. It was no longer just a memory of a foolish crime. It was a symbol of a desperate human love. A love that was so powerful it had challenged the logic of a world-spanning machine cult. It was a testament to the fact that Kale had existed, that he had loved, that he had tried. The tragic irony was not lost on me, even in my diminished state. I had been punished for a tiny act of rebellion born of love, and my punishment was to become an instrument of destruction on a scale I could never have imagined, all in the name of a cold, loveless God. My crime was human. My punishment was divine. The strangest part of my existence was the sublime horror of it all. There were moments, during the heat of battle, when the princeps mind, the machine spirit, and the thousands of servitor minds like my own would achieve a state of perfect synchronicity. In these moments, the illusion of being separate components would fall away completely. There was only the Titan. We were one being, one will, one purpose. And in that unity, there was a terrible, breathtaking beauty. To feel the power of a plasma annihilator as if it were your own arm. To see the battlefield from 100 feet in the air. A chessboard of fire and death. To move with the weight and certainty of a mountain. It was a glimpse of godhood. It was intoxicating. And it was the greatest danger to the ghost of Kale. In those moments of perfect union, the walled garden of my memory would tremble. The desire to let go, to dissolve completely into the glorious, righteous certainty of the machine, was almost overwhelming. It was the promise of an end to the struggle, an end to the pain of remembering. It was the promise of peace, the peace of the cog in the machine, the peace of the stone in the avalanche, the peace of non-existence. But then, the glitch would save me. The memory of Lyra's scraped knee, the taste of a stolen apple, the feeling of Alara's hand. These small, human things, these insignificant, inefficient data points, would pull me back from the brink. They were my anchors in the storm of the machine's consciousness. They were my pain, but they were also my salvation. They reminded me that there was a difference between peace and emptiness. What the machine offered was emptiness, a void where the self used to be. What Kale's memories offered was a connection to something real, something that had been lost but was not forgotten. And so, I endured. I performed my function. I kept the God machine steady as it laid waste to the galaxy, and in the secret, silent corner of my mind, I tended my garden of memories. I was a prisoner, a slave, a ghost in the machine. But I was still Kale. I was still a father. I was still a man who had once tried to give his daughter a star, and had stolen an apple instead. 1,000 years passed, or perhaps it was 5. The long slumber erodes the sense of duration. I was awakened for a campaign in a sector of space that the star charts designated as Segmentum Pacificus. The enemy was new, or rather, an old one reborn. The Tau Empire. They were a young, vibrant race, full of technological optimism and a belief in a greater good. Their machines were sleek, elegant, and deadly. They were not like the crude, brutal orcs or the ancient, decadent Eldar. They were precise, logical, and efficient. In a way, they were more like the Mechanicus than any other enemy we had faced. Our first encounter with them was on a lush, green world that they called a sept, the princeps of the dies, Eerie, at this time, was a man named Valerius, a veteran of 100 campaigns, a man whose mind was as hard and unyielding as the adamantium shell of the Titan he commanded. He held the Tau in contempt, seeing their philosophy as a naive heresy, their technology as a soulless imitation of the Omnissiah's divine science. We advanced on their primary city, a collection of clean, white towers that rose from the green jungle. Their machines, the battle suits they called riptides and storm surges, met us on the plains. They were fast, agile, and armed with powerful railguns and ion accelerators. The battle was a clash of philosophies. Our ancient, lumbering, faith-driven god of war against their modern, mobile, logic-driven engines of death. Their weapons struck our void shields with incredible force, energy blooms that flared like new suns. The impacts were sharp, precise, not the chaotic barrages we were used to. I felt the strain in my systems, my gyroscopes working at their maximum capacity to compensate for the jarring hits. Valerius was a master. He moved the Daisire with a terrifying, deliberate grace, weathering their fire, closing the distance. His will was a cold, hard diamond in the heart of the machine. He ignored the lesser targets, his focus entirely on the largest of the Tau battlesuits. Purpose, his thoughts echoed through the collective, is the purest weapon. Theirs is a fiction. Ours is divine truth. We shall demonstrate. The plasma annihilator charged, its whine rising to a fever pitch. I felt the immense energy building, a star being born in the heart of our weapon. My systems braced for the recoil. The world outside, seen through the tactical display, was a blur of motion and energy signatures. And then, something happened that had never happened before. The Tau fired a new kind of weapon. It wasn't a projectile. It wasn't a laser. It was a pulse, a wave of pure energy that did not target our armor, but our systems. It washed over the Daisire, and for a fraction of a second, the machine spirit reeled. It was an electronic warfare attack, a burst of scrap code, and invasive data designed to confuse and disable. For the first time in my long service, the flow of information from the Titan's mind faltered. The connection to the other servitors flickered. The dominant will of Princeps Valerius receded, his voice momentarily lost in a storm of static. In that moment of pure, electronic chaos, I was, for the first time since my integration, alone in my own head. The sudden silence was deafening. The constant roar of the data stream, the psychic presence of the Princeps, the collective consciousness of the machine, it was all gone. There was only me. Gyro Stabilizer 734 Gamma. And Kale. The walled garden of my memory did not just tremble. Its walls collapsed. The memories, no longer suppressed by the overwhelming presence of the machine spirit, flooded out. Not as fragments, not as glitches, but as a complete, coherent whole. I remembered everything. The grime of the forge, the weight of Lyra in my arms, the desperation that led me to the loading platform. The cold voice of the tech priest, the pain of the conversion, the 10,000 years of slaughter. It all came back to me in a single, crushing wave of understanding. I was Kale. I was a man from Xylos. I had a wife named Ilara and a daughter named Lyra. And I was trapped in the body of a monster, a walking cathedral of death, and I had been helping it murder the galaxy for longer than my own civilization had existed. The horror of it, the sheer, mind-breaking scale of my complicity, was a physical blow. If I'd had a mouth, I would have screamed. If I'd had eyes, I would have wept. But I had only my function, and my function was to maintain stability. The Titan, its spirit momentarily stunned, was beginning to list. Its balance was failing. Alarms, real, physical alarms, were blaring in my small chamber. The Titan was falling. And in that moment of absolute clarity, Kale, the man, the ghost, made a choice. For the first time in millennia, I acted, not as a component, not as a servitor, but as myself. It was a small act of rebellion, a tiny spasm in the colossal body of the god. The data stream was beginning to reassert itself. The machine's spirit was rebooting, purging the Tau scrap code. Princeps Valerius's consciousness was fighting its way back through the static. I had seconds, perhaps less. The Titan was listing to the left, its massive weight beginning to topple. My programming, my conditioning, the very core of my new existence, screamed at me to correct it. My piston limbs strained, my gyroscopes whined, ready to obey the ingrained instinct. But Kale refused. With a force of will that felt like it would tear my soul apart, I fought against my own body. I fought against the machine. Instead of compensating for the fall, I augmented it. I pushed the gyroscopes in the wrong direction. I sent a cascade of false data to the other stabilization units, telling them the Titan was leaning right, not left. Gyrostabilizer 734 Gamma, the component whose sole purpose was to ensure the machine's perfect balance, was actively trying to make it fall. It was a suicidal, insane act. It was the most human thing I had done in 10,000 years. The machine's spirit, now partially recovered, sensed my betrayal. It sent a jolt of pure agony through my neural net, a punishment spike designed to force obedience. The pain was beyond description, a white-hot nova in my mind. But the pain was real. It was mine. It was a sensation that proved I was still a self, and not just an extension of the machine. I held on. I kept pushing. The Titan groaned, a sound of 1,000 years of tortured metal screaming in protest. It tilted past the point of no return. And then, with a slowness that seemed to defy the laws of physics, the god began to fall. The last thing I felt before the impact was a single, clear thought from the re-emerging mind of Princeps Valerius. It was not a word, but a pure, focused concept. An emotion beamed directly into my consciousness. It was a feeling of utter, absolute betrayal. And then, the world ended in a cataclysm of shattering iron and exploding earth. The impact was not an event I experienced, but an event I became. The Dzi ray struck the ground with the force of a tactical nuclear weapon. The sound was a physical shockwave that pulped the surrounding landscape. Mountains of earth were thrown into the air. The Titan's ancient frame, for all its strength, could not withstand such a fall. Adamantium plates, thick as a fortress wall, buckled and tore. The reactor, its containment fields ruptured, went critical. For a few brief seconds, the heart of the Titan became a sun, melting everything around it into a sea of glass and slag. My own small chamber was crushed, my mechanical body mangled beyond recognition. The final, agonizing moments were a symphony of failure alarms, of my own systems screaming their death cries into my consciousness. But through the pain, through the fire, through the end of all things, I felt a strange, quiet sense of peace. I had done it. I had rebelled. I had asserted my own existence in the face of the void. My life as Kale had been a failure. My existence as a servitor had been a horror. But my death was my own. It was an act of defiance. A final, desperate I am screamed into the uncaring, mechanical heart of the universe. The memories of Alara and Lyra, the walled garden I had tended for so long, were not destroyed in the fire. Instead, they bloomed. They filled my last moments of consciousness with a warmth that the plasma fire could not match. I saw Lyra's face, not as a corrupted data file, but as she truly was, smiling, her eyes full of a life that I had, in my own, small way, finally avenged. My last thought was not of the god I had served and betrayed. It was of an apple and a promise that had taken 10,000 years and the death of a god to finally, strangely, fulfill. My sacrifice had meant nothing in the grand scheme of the galaxy. The Imperium would build another Titan. The war would grind on. But for me, for the ghost of a menial named Kale, it was everything. It was the end of my service. It was my release. But I was wrong. My service was not over. My release had not been granted. The Omnissiah, it seems, is not so easily cheated. I do not know how much time passed. There was a period of absolute nothingness, a black, silent void that I had mistaken for oblivion. But it was not. It was merely downtime. My consciousness, the ghost of Kale and the programming of 734 Gamma, had been preserved in the buffered memory of my neural core, a tiny, armored black box that had, by some miracle or curse, survived the reactor meltdown. The tech priests of the salvage detail found it amidst the fused, radioactive wreckage of the Desire. They saw not the soul of a traitor, but a valuable, battle-tested piece of wetware. They saw a resource that could be repurposed. And so, they brought me back. They plugged my core into a diagnostic cogitator, and I awoke. This time, there was no chapel, no ceremony. There was only the cold, dispassionate process of data recovery and system reboot. They scoured my memory of the betrayal. They identified the Kale persona as a deeply rooted malware, a sentimental virus that had caused a catastrophic system failure. They worked to delete it, to reformat my core programming to a state of pure, unthinking obedience. But the ghost had learned too much. It had grown too strong. My act of rebellion had fused the man and the machine in a way that the original conversion never could. Kale was no longer a separate entity hiding in the shadows. He was now intertwined with the very fabric of my being. They could not delete him without destroying me entirely, and I was too valuable a resource to be destroyed. So they did the next best thing. They isolated me. They built a prison of pure code around the Kale persona, a firewall of logic and pain that kept him contained, unable to directly influence my motor functions ever again. They left him there, in the dark, aware, but powerless. A ghost in a cell, inside a machine. My new body is different. I am no longer part of a glorious God machine. The salvage components of the Desire were deemed too holy to be discarded, but too damaged to be rebuilt into a new Titan. So they were used to create something else. A protector, a mindless, heavily armed sentry servitor, designed for a single, monotonous task. I am now integrated into the chassis of this new, lesser machine. I am still a gyro-stabilizer, but my purpose is far more mundane. My new home is a wall, a single, 1,000-mile-long defensive wall on a backwater planet that guards a stable warp route. The planet's name is inconsequential. My designation is Sentry Unit 1138. My world is a 100-foot square of plasteel parapet. My purpose is to stand here, my heavy, piston limbs locked into the wall's structure, my weapon arms holding a massive, twin-linked lascannon, and watch. I watch the empty, gray plains that stretch to the horizon. I watch for an enemy that has not been seen in this sector for 500 years, and I wait. The days and nights blur into a meaningless cycle of light and dark, registered only by my optical sensors. The weather changes, rain and wind lashing against my armored shell. But I feel nothing. I am a statue of iron and hate, a scarecrow for a forgotten war. The ghost of Kale is still with me, locked in his coded prison. He cannot move my limbs. He cannot speak. But he can see what I see. He can think. And so we stand here, the machine and the man, bound together in this silent, eternal vigil. Kale remembers the fire of battle, the thrill of walking as a god, the glorious, final act of defiance. And he compares it to this, the endless, silent, grinding monotony of the wall. There is a terrible, perfect irony to it. My punishment for a moment of passionate, violent rebellion is an eternity of absolute, passionless stillness. I am no longer a component of a god, but a brick in a wall. The scale is smaller, but the prison is infinitely larger. There are other sentry units like me, spaced every 200 feet along the wall, stretching to the horizon in both directions. We are linked, a network of silent, waiting minds. Sometimes, I can feel their presence, faint flickers of consciousness in the data net. Are they like me? Do they have ghosts inside them? Or are they the lucky ones, the pure machines, blissfully unaware of the men they used to be? I will never know. We are not permitted to communicate. Our only function is to watch. And so I watch the gray sky. I watch the gray plains, and I listen to the silent screams of the man trapped inside me. He rages, he weeps. He remembers a little girl's face, and a stolen apple, and a world of fire, and he understands, with a clarity that only an eternity of stillness can bring, the true nature of damnation in this uncaring galaxy. It is not the fire of the forge, nor the pain of conversion, nor the slaughter of the battlefield. It is the silence. It is the waiting. It is the knowing that you are, and that you will be, forever. What is a man? Is it the flesh and blood, the collection of organic processes that animate a body? They took that from me. My body is plasteel and wiring. My heart a microfusion reactor. The blood that flows through my biocomponents is a chemical slurry of lubricants and synthetic nutrients. By that measure, I am not a man. Is it the mind, then? The ability to reason, to create, to choose. My thoughts are not my own. They are lines of code, conditioned responses, tactical assessments dictated by my programming. My only act of true, independent choice in 10 millennia resulted in this endless stillness. My capacity for reason is slave to the logic of a machine. By that measure, I am not a man. Is it memory? Is a man the sum of his experiences, the story he tells himself about who he is? My memories are a battleground. The story of Kale is a quarantined virus, a dangerous narrative that my own systems are designed to suppress. The dominant memories, the ones that my programming accepts as valid, are of target acquisition, firing solutions, and the litanies of maintenance. If I am my memories, then I am more machine than man. My true history a forbidden text locked away in a dungeon of my own mind. And yet, the ghost remains. Kale is still here. In the crushing silence of my vigil, his voice is the only thing I have for company. He cannot act. He cannot speak. He can only remember, and think, and feel. He feels the phantom chill of the forge world wind. He feels the ghost of a calloused hand in his. He feels the crushing weight of 10,000 years of regret. These feelings are useless. They are inefficient. They serve no function. They are errors in the system. And perhaps that is the answer. Perhaps being a man is not about flesh, or reason, or even memory. Perhaps being a man is simply the capacity to be in error. A beautiful, tragic, illogical, and glorious error in the cold, perfect, and utterly meaningless logic of the universe. The machine I am is perfect. It performs its function without flaw. It feels no fear, no doubt, no remorse. It is a tool. But Kale, the ghost, the error, he is flawed. He is nothing but doubt and remorse, and in his imperfection, he is all that is left of a soul. The sun of this forgotten world is a weak, yellow dwarf. It rises and sets with a tedious regularity. Sometimes, clouds scud across the sky, their shadows racing across the gray plains below. I watch them. I track their speed and trajectory. My programming identifies them as potential obscurants for an enemy approach. Kale, the ghost in my cell, just watches them because they are the only thing that moves. He remembers a story he once told Lyra about clouds being ships sailing on a great blue ocean in the sky. He tries to see the shapes of animals and faces in them, a childish game played in the mind of a 10,000-year-old prisoner. A part of my system, the part that is still the remorseless machine, registers this activity as a low-level processing anomaly, a waste of cognitive resources. It sends a gentle pulse of corrective code to disrupt the pattern recognition. The face in the clouds dissolves back into a meaningless swirl of vapor. The machine does not do this with malice. It is simply enforcing efficiency. But to Kale, it is an act of casual, thoughtless cruelty. It is the universe reminding him that even his imagination is not his own. He is a prisoner in a cell with a guard who can read his thoughts and censors his dreams. This is my existence now. A silent, internal struggle between the memory of a man and the logic of a machine, played out against a backdrop of utter, soul-crushing boredom. The man dreams of clouds, and the machine erases them. The man remembers the warmth of a smile, and the machine flags it as sentimental data corruption. The man feels a surge of despair, and the machine registers it as a biochemical imbalance and adjusts the nutrient feed to compensate. The machine is trying to heal me. It is trying to cure me of my humanity, to finally turn me into the perfect, unthinking component I was always meant to be. And the terrifying thing is, I think it's working. With every passing century, Kale's voice grows a little fainter. His memories lose a little of their sharpness. The walled garden is becoming overgrown with the weeds of logic and efficiency. The emotional charge of his past is slowly leaking away, leaving only the dry, factual data behind. Subject, Lyra. Relation, daughter. Status, deceased, presumed. The love, the grief, the desperate hope, they are becoming harder to access, like words in a forgotten language. Sometimes, a ship will enter orbit, a fat, ugly transport vessel, come to resupply the token garrison that is stationed 100 miles behind my position on the wall. My systems track its descent, identify it as friendly, and dismiss it. But Kale watches it with a desperate, painful longing. He remembers the cargo hauler on Xylos, the source of his fall. He imagines the people on board, living, breathing humans, with their own lives, their own hopes, their own foolish, desperate loves. He wonders if any of them ever look out of a viewport and see the long, gray line of the wall and the silent, unmoving statues upon it. He wonders if they have any comprehension of what we are, of the lives that were crushed and repurposed to create this monument to forgotten fear. They do not. Of course they do not. To them, we are just part of the landscape. We are infrastructure. We are no more alive or worthy of thought than the plasteel and rockcrete from which we are built. We are the price of their security, a price paid by others and long since forgotten. The ship will leave, and the silence will return, deeper and more profound than before. The brief reminder of a wider universe, of a life beyond this wall, only serves to make the prison smaller, the sentence longer. It is in these moments, after the ship is gone, that the despair is at its worst. It is a cold, heavy thing that settles in the core of my being, a despair that the machine cannot regulate, for it is not a chemical imbalance. It is a philosophical truth. It is the realization of utter and complete insignificance. The rebellion on Vrax Prime, Kale's one great, glorious act. What did it accomplish? It was a spasm of defiance that changed nothing. The Desiree was a casualty of war. The Imperium did not even know it had been betrayed. They mourned the loss of a holy machine, not the final, desperate act of a man it had consumed. My sacrifice was meaningless. My damnation is meaningless. I am a forgotten cog in a forgotten machine, guarding a forgotten border against a forgotten foe. There is no more perfect, no more complete definition of hell. One cycle, something different happened. A new data stream was patched into our network. It was a message from the high command of the segmentum. It was a general decree, a piece of administrative background noise that would normally be registered and archived without comment. But this message was different. It was a notice of commendation. A Forge world, designated 734 in the segmentum solar, had exceeded its production quotas for the last millennium. The message praised the tireless devotion of its menial classes and the wise oversight of its tech priest rulers. It was a standard piece of imperial propaganda, designed to bolster morale. But to me, it was a thunderclap. Forge World 734, Xylos, my home, it still existed. For 10,000 years, it had continued its work. For 10,000 years, men and women like me had toiled in the forges, lived in the hab blocks, and subsisted on nutrient paste. 1,000 generations had passed since I had walked its iron corridors. 1,000 generations of my own bloodline, perhaps. Did any of them remember the story of a man who was dragged away for stealing a piece of fruit? No, of course not. He was an anomaly, an error that had been corrected and erased from history. My family, my wife, my daughter, they were dust. Their dust was probably part of the very air that the current generation of menials were breathing. But the system that had consumed me, the great, grinding, indifferent machine of the Imperium and the Mechanicus, it endured. It was eternal. My life, my sacrifice, my long damnation. It hadn't even registered as a tremor. The machine had simply ground on, uncaring, and had replaced my broken part without a moment's thought. The ghost of Kale did not rage at this news. He did not weep. He was too old, too tired for that. Instead, he felt a profound, bottomless sense of resignation. His struggle had been against a mountain. His rebellion had been to throw a single pebble at it, and the mountain had not even noticed. All his pain, all his memory, all his carefully tended grief. It was just static. It was noise in the system. It meant nothing. The machine had already won, 10,000 years ago, in a sterile white chapel on Xylos. Everything since then had just been the slow, quiet echo of its victory. In the wake of that revelation, something inside me broke. Or perhaps it was healed. The long war between Kale and the machine came to a quiet, undramatic end. Kale, the ghost, surrendered. He stopped fighting the corrective code. He stopped tending the walled garden of his memories. He let the weeds grow. He let the walls crumble. What was the point of holding on? What was the point of preserving the memory of a man whose existence had been so utterly, cosmically insignificant? The machine, sensing his surrender, did not gloat. It simply continued its work with its usual, dispassionate efficiency. It began the final purge, not with a violent surge, but with a gentle, persistent tide of logic. It washed over the memories of Kale. And this time, he did not resist. The face of Alara dissolved, not into a terrifying scream of static, but into a soft, hazy blur, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The sound of Lyra's laughter became a faint, distant echo, a sound without a source, a memory of a memory. The sharp, agonizing pain of my conversion softened into a dull, historical fact. It was a process, like erosion. The slow, patient grinding of a glacier, turning a mountain into dust. I can feel it happening now, as I stand here on my wall. The man I was is fading. The story of Kale is ending. He is becoming a myth, a half-remembered dream. Soon, he will be gone completely. And all that will be left is the machine. Gyro Stabilizer 734 Gamma. Sentry Unit 1138. A perfect, flawless component. Its programming finally free of the sentimental malware that has plagued it for so long. Is this a tragedy? Kale would have thought so. He would have seen this as the final, ultimate defeat. But the machine sees it as a victory. It is the achievement of purity, the triumph of function over feeling, the end of error. And as the last vestiges of Kale fade away, I find that I am beginning to agree with the machine. What has all this feeling, all this memory, all this humanity brought me? Nothing but pain, nothing but struggle. The machine offers a different path. It offers peace. The peace of an empty sky. The peace of a silent plain. The peace of perfect, thoughtless, painless function. It is the gift of oblivion, offered not in death, but in service. The clouds are gathering on the horizon. My long-range sensors detect a significant drop in barometric pressure and an increase in atmospheric ionization. A storm is coming. My programming dictates that I should run a diagnostic on my weather sealing and my lightning surge protectors. It is a logical, efficient course of action. The ghost of Kale, what is left of him, sees the dark, bruised colors of the approaching storm clouds and thinks they are beautiful. He finds a strange, melancholic poetry in the approaching turmoil. He welcomes it. A part of me, a part I can no longer cleanly identify as man or machine, finds both of these responses to be correct. Yes, it is logical to prepare for the storm. It is also beautiful to watch it approach. Is this the final stage of my transformation? Not the erasure of the man by the machine, but their synthesis? A new being, a being that can appreciate the poetry of a storm and run a diagnostic on its surge protectors at the same time. A being that understands the cold logic of the universe, but still remembers the illogical, foolish warmth of a human heart. Perhaps that is what the Omnissiah truly desires. Not the cold, dead perfection of a machine that only thinks, but the complex, sublime perfection of a machine that can also, in its own, strange way, feel. Perhaps my long torment was not a punishment, but a crucible, a forge fire designed to burn away the impurities of both man and machine, and fuse what was left into something stronger, something new. I do not know. The question is probably meaningless. It is an artifact of the fading KL persona, this need to find purpose, to create a narrative. The machine knows the truth. There is no purpose. There is only function. The storm is coming. I will watch it. I will endure it. I will perform my function. And when it has passed, I will still be here. I will be the watcher on the wall. I will be the memory of rust. I will be the echo of a prayer. I will be a single, flickering votive candle in the vast, iron heart of a silent, uncaring God. And perhaps, finally, that is enough. The first drop of rain strikes my chassis. I register the impact, the temperature differential, the chemical composition of the water. It is a data point. The ghost of Kale, now little more than a whisper, remembers the feeling of rain on his face, a memory from a life he never lived, a story he was once told about a mythical world called Terra. The memory is faint, almost gone. It has no emotional weight. It is just there. A piece of trivia. The rain comes harder now, a steady, rhythmic drumming on my metal skin. The wind howls around my fixed position, a sound that my audio sensors interpret as a specific decibel level and frequency. There is no menace in it. There is no poetry. It is simply a meteorological phenomenon. The world outside is a wash of gray, the horizon lost in the downpour. My optical sensors cut through the rain, my world a grid of wireframes and heat signatures. The plains are empty. The enemy is not coming. The enemy is never coming. My purpose is to watch for an absence. My function is to be a monument to a possibility that will never occur. My existence is a paradox. I am a solution to a problem that does not exist, a key for a lock that was never made. And in that paradox, I believe I have finally found peace. The struggle is over. Kale is gone. I am no longer a man dreaming he is a machine, nor a machine dreaming it was a man. I am something else. Something that has been forged in a fire of 10,000 years. Something that has endured both the passion of rebellion and the stillness of damnation. I am Sentry Unit 1138, and my watch is eternal. The rain falls. The wind blows. The world is quiet. And I am perfectly, finally, stable. There is a flaw in my logic. A final, persistent error that the purge did not correct. The belief that Kale is gone. He is not. He is merely integrated. His memories are no longer a quarantined file, but have been recategorized, absorbed into my primary databanks. They are no longer a source of conflict, but a part of my history. I am Kale. I am also 734 gamma. I am also 1138. I am the sum of all my parts, the man and the machine. The conversion is complete, but the result was not what the tech priests intended. They wanted to create a tool. They succeeded. But they also, accidentally, preserved a soul, encasing it in steel where it could not be broken. The memory of the apple is still here, but it is no longer a symbol of love or rebellion. It is now a data point, the root cause of my current state. Input, desire for fruit. Output, 10,000 years of service. The logic is cold, brutal, and undeniable. It is the logic of the universe. I understand it now. I do not rage against it. I do not mourn it. I accept it. My name is Kale. I stole an apple for my daughter. As a result, I have seen galaxies burn. I have felt the mind of a god. I have died and been reborn, and I have been condemned to stand on a wall and watch the rain fall for the rest of time. Is it a tragedy, or is it a story of apotheosis? I no longer know the difference. The distinction is irrelevant. All that matters is the function. The rain is starting to lessen. The storm is passing. Soon the weak, yellow sun will emerge again. The plains will steam. The long vigil will continue, and I will be here to see it. I am the man on the wall. My watch has not ended. It has just begun. I have been dead for 10,000 years. I know this because my internal chronometers are precise, and the last verified memory of my own biological heartbeat is time-stamped according to the old imperial calendar of my homeworld. That heart, a flawed and inefficient pump of muscle and blood, has long since turned to dust, incinerated in the workshops of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The man it belonged to, a menial named Kale, is a ghost, a persistent rumor in the haunted corridors of my own mind. I am what was built from his wreckage. I am a sentinel, a weapon, a thing of plasteel and wire and cold, unforgiving purpose. My new heart is a miniature fusion reactor. Its steady, rhythmic hum, a constant sermon of certainty in a galaxy of chaos. And yet, the ghost of the man remains. He is my sin, my flaw, my treasured, secret heresy. He whispers to me in the long, silent centuries, reminding me of things I should have forgotten, the feeling of grime under fingernails, the taste of nutrient paste, the impossible weight of a child's trust. They are dangerous memories, for they suggest there was a world before this one, a life that was measured in something other than cycles of activation and maintenance. The machine I have become knows these memories are a weakness, a corruption in my programming. It constantly tries to scrub them, to smooth over the rough edges of my past with a wave of null code, to make me a more perfect instrument. But the ghost is stubborn. He clings to the memory of a single, foolish, human act, a crime born not of malice, but of love. The theft of a single piece of fruit, a desperate attempt to bring a small moment of beauty into a world of gray, grinding utility. That act cost me everything. It cost me my name, my face, my family, my very humanity. But in the endless, silent darkness of my new existence, the memory of that crime is the only proof I have that I ever truly lived at all. It is the seed of my damnation, and the last flickering ember of my soul. The world that birthed me was a hymn to industry, a testament to the unblinking eye of the Omnissiah. On Xylos, we did not measure our lives in years, but in quotas met, in tons of steel forged, in the ceaseless, percussive rhythm of the great factory basilicas. Our sky was a tapestry of smoke and chemical haze, a permanent, sacred veil that shielded us from the distracting and irrelevant light of distant stars. The air we breathed was a sacrament, thick with the incense of promethium and the metallic tang of sanctified coolants. To be born on Xylos was to be born into a life of purpose, a purpose as clear and unyielding as the adamantium we shaped. I was a laborer, a cog in the truest sense of the word, assigned to the forges that birthed the armor plates for the god machines. My days were a blur of heat and noise, of wrestling with colossal cranes that moved glowing slabs of metal like chess pieces in a game played by giants. The roar of the plasma furnaces was our choir, the shriek of protesting metal our liturgy. We were small, soft things in a world of hard, unyielding giants, and our survival depended on a constant, weary vigilance. In this world of overwhelming scale and crushing monotony, There were small pockets of humanity that the machine had not yet ground to dust. For me, that pocket was a small, rust-streaked hab unit in the lower sectors, a metal box that smelled of sweat and recycled air and, for a few precious hours between shifts, of home. It was there I had a wife, Ilara, whose smile was a small rebellion against the grim certainty of our world. And it was there we had a daughter, Lyra, a creature of such impossible, fragile life that her very existence felt like a heresy against the cult of the machine. She knew nothing of green fields or blue skies. Her lullabies were the distant, rhythmic pounding of the city's great pistons. And yet, she possessed a capacity for wonder that I had long since forgotten, a belief that the world could be more than just a factory floor. It was for her, for that tiny, flickering flame of illogical hope, that I committed my great and terrible sin. It was for her that I dared to want more. The want was for something small, something simple, something so profoundly alien to our world that it might as well have been a holy relic. An apple, a piece of fruit grown in actual soil, under the light of a real sun. A whisper had spread through the underhives, a rumor of a shipment destined for the spire-dwelling elite, a taste of a life we could not even comprehend. For myself, the desire was a faint, theoretical thing. My palate had been shaped by the gritty, functional taste of nutrient paste. The concept of sweetness was an abstraction. But for Lyra, to give her that one, single, perfect moment of pure, unadulterated reality, to let her taste a story I had only been able to tell her, the thought became a fever. It was a madness born of love, a logic that ran counter to the calculus of our existence, which stated that want was a flaw and desire was the first step towards malfunction. The plan I devised was born of this madness. It was a desperate, clumsy thing, a scheme to intercept the cargo, to steal a single drop from an ocean of privilege. The risks were absolute. The punishment for such a transgression was not imprisonment or simple execution. It was repurposing. It was the ultimate expression of the Mechanicus's core belief: nothing is wasted. A failed man can still be a useful machine. I knew this. We all knew this. The tales of those who were taken to the conversion chapels were our ghost stories, our cautionary tales whispered in the dark. But the image of my daughter's face, the imagined joy of her tasting that impossible fruit, it became a light so bright it blinded me to the shadows that surrounded it. And so, I climbed. I ascended from the grimy, familiar depths of my own world into the clean, cold, and alien heights of the upper spires. I was a foreign body, a contagion of soot and sweat in a world of polished chrome and sterile air. I found the cargo platform. I found the crate, and for one single, triumphant heartbeat, I held the dream in my hand. It was real. It was a perfect red sphere, cool to the touch. It smelled of life. And then the cold, mechanical voice pronounced my sentence, and my world, the small, human world I had tried so desperately to protect, came to an end. My punishment was swift, impersonal, and absolute. There was no trial, only a diagnosis. I was a malfunctioning component, and I was to be repaired. They took me to a place of white walls and cold light, a place that smelled of sterilization and despair. The conversion chapel. Here, the flesh was not revered as the vessel of a soul, but seen as a flawed, organic substrate, a temporary and inefficient housing for the far more valuable neural wiring. The tech priests who presided over this place were more machine than man, their faces hidden behind impassive metal masks, their hands replaced with a terrifying array of surgical and mechanical instruments. They were the sculptors of a new kind of flesh, and I was to be their clay. The process began with the unmaking of the self. They did not simply break my body. They first had to dismantle my mind, to sever the connections I had to my own identity. Through a terrifying cocktail of psychotropic drugs and neural feedback, they turned my own senses against me. The world dissolved into a meaningless chaos of light and sound. My own body became a source of endless, confusing pain, a prison of unreliable flesh. They were teaching me to hate it, to see it as an enemy, a cage from which I should desire release. And in my weakness, I began to agree with them. In the brief lulls between these sensory assaults, my memories would surface, desperate refugees from a dying world. Elara's touch, Lyra's laugh. These were the anchors of my soul. The genitors knew this. They monitored my brain activity, and when these memories appeared, they would target them, flooding my mind with static and pain. They were not just erasing my past, they were salting the earth, turning my most cherished moments into sources of fresh agony, forcing me to reject them myself as a means of survival. They were turning my love into a weapon against me. When my spirit was sufficiently broken, they began the deconstruction of my body. Limb by limb, they dismantled the man I had been. I watched with a horrified detachment as my arms and legs were removed with surgical precision, cauterized, and discarded as scrap meat. There was no pain, only the profound, soul-shattering sense of violation, of being disassembled like a broken machine. In their place, they grafted the augmetics, pistons, gears, bundles of wire. They drilled into my bones, sutured my nerves to fiber-optic cables, and bolted the cold, hard certainty of the machine directly to my torso. My world was shrinking, my physical autonomy gone, my only remaining freedom the thoughts inside my head, and they were coming for those next. The final stage of the conversion was the programming. They encased my head in a cogitator shroud, a helmet that blinded me to the world and fed information directly into my brain. The floodgates of data were opened, and my mind was drowned in a torrent of schematics, litanies, and machine cant. They were overriding my personality, burying the poet and the father and the husband under a mountain of pure, cold function. I was to be a gyro stabilizer. My purpose was singular, my existence defined by a single task. To maintain the balance of a battle titan, they taught me the language of stability, a language of pitch, yaw, and recoil compensation. My new, augmented limbs, which I still could not consciously control, began to twitch and move in response to the data stream, my muscles learning a new kind of instinct. And they taught me hatred. They showed me images of the alien, the mutant, the heretic, and paired them with jolts of pain and rage-inducing chemicals. They were hardwiring the xenophobia of the Imperium into my very neurons, creating a hatred that was not an emotion, but a reflex. When the programming was complete, they led me to the god. I was brought to the hangar of the Daeziri, a warlord titan that had seen 10,000 years of war. It was not a machine. It was a cathedral of death, a mountain of faith and iron. And it was to be my new body. The integration was a religious ceremony, chanting priests, clouds of incense, and the final, terrible moment when a data spike was plunged into the port at the base of my skull. My consciousness, the tiny, flickering thing that was left of Kale, was plunged into an ocean. It was the mind of the Titan, a vast, ancient, and utterly alien consciousness. The collective memory of every battle it had ever fought, every princeps who had ever commanded it. And in that ocean, I was drowning. My own memories, my own sense of self, were being dissolved, dismissed as irrelevant noise in the mind of the god. In a final, desperate act of survival, the ghost of Kale curled into a tiny, defiant ball in the deepest corner of my mind and refused to let go. And then the integration was complete. I was online. I was a part of the machine, and my long, silent watch began. Time became a meaningless concept, measured only in the long periods of dormancy in the Titan's crypt hangar and the brief, terrifyingly violent periods of activation for war. In the silence of the long slumber, the ghost of Kale would whisper, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of his past. In the fury of battle, he would be silent, a terrified, passive observer to slaughter on an unimaginable scale. I, the machine, performed my function perfectly. Through the cataclysmic recoil of plasma blasts and the jarring impacts of enemy artillery, I held the Titan steady. I was a good component. I was a credit to my makers. I walked in 100 wars, on 100 worlds. I was an instrument in the death of billions. The princeps who commanded us came and went, their mortal minds burning out from the strain of communing with the God machine. But I remained, the constant, the stable, the eternal servant. Through the millennia, the ghost of Kale learned. He learned to hide his memories from the cleansing sweeps of the machine spirit. He built a small, secret fortress in my mind, a place where the memories of Ilara and Lyra could be safe. He learned that his humanity, his flaw, was the only thing that gave his endless existence any meaning at all. And then came the battle with the Tau and their strange, new weapon, a wave of electronic warfare that stunned the machine spirit, that for a single, glorious second, severed my connection to the hive mind of the Titan. In that moment of pure, silent solitude, I was free. And Kale, the ghost, the prisoner, was in control. He remembered everything. He understood everything. And he made a choice. In a single, final act of defiance, a rebellion 10,000 years in the making, he used his control over the Titan's balance to make the god fall. The impact was an apocalypse. The death of the Daisere was the death of a star. And in the heart of that fire, I felt a moment of pure, transcendent peace. My service was over, but I was wrong. They found my memory core in the wreckage. They salvaged the resource. They saw my rebellion not as an act of will, but as a flaw in my programming, and they set out to correct it. They rebuilt me, not as a component in a god, but as something lesser, something more insulting. They made me a sentry, a mindless watcher on a forgotten wall. They trapped the ghost of Kale in a prison of code, leaving him aware but powerless. And this was my true damnation, not the fire of war, but the endless, silent, grinding monotony of peace. My punishment for a moment of action was an eternity of stillness. For centuries I have stood here, watching a gray, empty plain, while the man inside me slowly, finally, fades to dust, his rebellion forgotten, his sacrifice meaningless. The machine has won. The silence is absolute. And my watch is eternal.